Welcome to Boulder Street Conversations. This is some of our staff team, and we are excited to just have a conversation about Sunday's message and kind of go deeper into what we talked about. So, Pastor Dan, you are the one who preached yesterday. Why don't you give us a little bit of a rundown of kind of the major points of your sermon?
Yeah, I think just talking about being formed in the place of prayer, and that we are formed in community. And so really the premise is that as disciples of Jesus, we never graduate from being a disciple. We never stop growing as disciples. And we talk a lot about practices and different things that we can implement into our lives. And I'd love to have some conversations about what that looks like for us. But I think at the root of it, there is this importance for how am I being formed in my relationship with God. So we talked about prayer. And then the realization that the people I surround myself with, and really, I guess the idea is that it's not just Christians that are being formed. It's not just, discipleship is not just a Christian thing, that within the context of humanity, we are not static. We are all changing. We are all growing or shrinking, whatever. And so we're either going to do it on purpose, with purpose, or end up somewhere we didn't mean to. And so as Christ followers, we want to be intentional about how we pursue looking like Jesus.
So one thing we talked about early on in the message was a quote that Eric sent to all of us earlier this week. And it was a white hot take from a pastor who we're not going to name. And so Eric, I would just love for you, because it happened to be the same time you were preparing this message of all times. You know what I mean? Like he could have sent that any time, but you're working on a message about being discipled in prayer, like being discipled in the scriptures and in the presence of God, and then discipled in community. And in the midst of that, Eric lobs this grenade. And so tell the rest of the table what that was.
Yeah, so you know me, I like to poke and prod at things. Dan this week texted a few of the pastors and just wanted us to go through and look through his sermon as he's talking about something that's very important to our community of discipleship in prayer. Dan likes to say that's our left and right arm, but we're left-handed. I'll let you decide which one's the left. So just reading through his sermon, looking through it, and then scrolling Instagram, see that, and it's very contrary to what we're talking about, where he goes through and says that the discipleship is on the front end, then salvation, and we're all good. So I was like, how would you respond to that? So just thought, hey, let me throw it in as Dan is talking about prayer and discipleship and the ongoing journey of discipleship. So, yeah.
So this pastor says, discipleship is for those who aren't saved. Is that right? Like he's like, hey, Matthew 28, Jesus sent the disciples out to go make disciples because none of the world knew Christ, right? Is that the idea? Amy, how did that hit you?
Oh, I think what it lacked was just the understanding that, we say yes to Jesus, we are justified, as covered in the blood, can enter the throne room with confidence and boldness, but it lacked that there's a sanctification process. And so if I were to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he was just trying to highlight, okay, we're all justified, but I think sanctification happens in the process of iron sharpening iron, as I apply the word to my life, I have to change. And as I'm doing life in a relationship with people, I have to change and be formed into the likeness of Jesus. And so I think that if our aim is I want to be equally yoked with Jesus, and there's going to be a day when I'm going to stand in front of him and that I want to know him, and that he calls me friend, and I have said yes to the refiner's fire throughout my life, and And so I have a vision for that. And so therefore, am I growing and am I maturing? And so I think until I stand before him, I'm always changing. and I have opportunity to, anyways, I don't know.
I think here we are, our first 5 minutes of our first conversation here, picking online fights. I think the point is that we feel called to, that is part of the role of Christian community, part of the role of church, that we would become mature disciples.
Yeah.
And part of our job, part of what we see God has called us to, part of what it means to be a part of the body of Christ, is that there is a worship element, that this is an altar of worship and prayer where people come to encounter the presence of God. There is a formation element where people come wherever you're at. So certainly, I don't know, discipling unbelievers, but the idea of there's a process of from unbelief to belief, but then a process of growing to maturity.
Yes.
And then all of that leading into that we would live for his reward, that we live on mission, outreach, and not just be working on ourselves. I think that, so to go back to the online, I think he was mostly saying we need to not just try to self-help, but we need to get outside of ourselves and reach other people. I think that was the point. But in a little clip, it was just, I think it hit on all of the things that we feel so called to in helping people grow in maturity. And so, and I think that that's one of the things that we feel I believe the Big C Church is called to that. I think we feel just a heavy burden. Like that's part of what God has called us to do at Boulder Street. So I think that's where it's kind of fun to dialogue back and forth. But the point is that how can we help people grow into maturity and to not stay in kind of the milk, but how do we continue to progress? How do we continue to take up our cross daily? How do we continue to follow Jesus? So,
can we talk about maturity for a second? I would love to even hear from some of you of how would you define maturity? Because I think that, a lot of us have background having, done kind of ministry schools or taken a season where, we were kind of the first years, and then we stepped into a position of leadership, and it's like, oh, you're deemed now spiritually mature. You can now, but I think we would all have probably different definitions of, even if we asked our body, like, am I spiritually mature? What does spiritual maturity look like? Is it a matter of just time? Is it that, I've been doing it for a certain amount of years? Like, what does spiritual maturity look like? And what's the litmus test if we are?
That's a great question.
I've always defined spiritual maturity as the ability, if we want to use ability, to hear God's voice and respond rightly to it. And I think there's a variety of ways where we hear God's voice, right? We hear it when we're reading the Bible and something jumps off the page, when we're in conversation with somebody and it's like the Holy Spirit within them is speaking. And so I think I've always thought of maturity as not the amount of Bible verses you can memorize or the theology or what stance you can take on whatever social issue, but spiritual maturity is what is God saying right now and what am I supposed to do in light of that?
I think in lockstep with that is the growing reaction when things come in life.
Yes.
And so I think, Dan, you have a really good kind of phrase on this. I'd love to hear it in a second. But just the idea that you've matured to a point that maybe your third reaction isn't ungodly. Eventually, maybe in my 80s, my first reaction is ungodly. But if it climbs from 10th reaction, being I'll go to prayer when I'm desperate, to third reaction going to prayer, that's maturity to me. Or I have faith. Third reaction, rather than maybe then I'm desperate and now I need to have faith because everything else has not worked, whether it's relationship or healing or whatever it might be. And so for me, a marker of spiritual maturity is how quick are you to react in a way that is fruit of the Spirit, that is spiritual disciplines, that is, I have a big decision coming up. Is your first reaction to call your mom, or is it to pray, or is it to 3-day fast, or what is the first reaction, or one of the first reactions, and I think the more that looks like Jesus, that becomes maturity for me. So I don't know that it's necessarily a timeline. There are people who radically saved, give their life to Jesus, and all of a sudden their maturity happens quick because they've seen God act and move and shift. And other people, my experience has been it's slower over time, where it's like, okay, actually I'm much better now than I was 5 years ago about praying and asking God for direction when I don't have direction, rather than calling Dan at 10 p.m. Dan, what do I do with my life? There's been a lot of those.
Yeah, I do think that the idea of not just my actions but my reactions. I'm one that my face betrays me all the time. I think I'm putting on a good face. I think I'm handling something well, and everybody's like, "Oh man," you can just read it on me. So would my reactions look more like I am abiding in the vine, and that we're remaining in Him and He remains in us? Zach, I love what you said about listening and responding. I do think there is an element where we're talking about is hearing the voice of God and then replying and applying that to our lives. I sent Kenny something this week that is, I don't think we've ever talked about this, so this is kind of fun. I was reading, and so this is somebody else's definition of maturity, but I'd love to just talk about it. It's really not in kind of where we've talked here, but so what they said is that it is the ability to, when hard things happen in life, so when you get hit with something difficult, to remain relational with people, to act like yourself. So not to get out of your identity and be something else. So you remain relational with people, you act like your true self, and return to joy. And that is kind of this mark of maturity. So I go to start my car today and it doesn't start. How much, that's a true story. Anyway, but how much can I be relational with people when things are hard, not just kind of get to where I'm in my own world and then stay in my God-given identity, not take on something else, and then return to a place of joy in the midst of hardship. I don't know, it's interesting to me, so that's a little different than what we've said. Maybe I sent it to you, maybe you've been able to think about it. How does that hit any of you guys? Does that make sense? I don't know.
I think it's remaining. What does remaining relational look like? I think it's listening, being able to be present, and not be threatened. And not be self-defense. Oh, now there's conflict, there's heightened emotions. Yeah. You're upset. Whether it's a spouse or a child or a coworker. Yeah. There's clearly tension. Are you able to remain relational and okay, I'm listening, I'm able to engage with you, I'm walking in my identity, I'm okay, I'm not threatened, no matter what they say, I'm gonna be okay. And then returning to joy. I'm just to know kind of what do you mean, what does that look like, or what does that mean?
I think it just is this idea of that you can have joy. It's the idea of joy being a supra emotion. In the midst of sorrow, you can still have joy. You can still, our hope, our trust can be in Jesus. It's not a fake joy. I think that's, just put on a happy face. But it's this, is the joy of the Lord my strength? And am I in despair? Maybe I'm not in despair because this terrible thing has happened. I have hope. I have joy. That's the fruit of the Spirit. So obviously, as you were talking about, that's part of maturing. I don't know. I'm just throwing out. There's maybe conversation. Maybe it's a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I think the relational connection. When we talk about joy, we talk about, does your face light up when you see somebody? So even joy, scripturally, about in the presence of God being in His face, and so it's when His face shines on us, that joy. And so I think. Returning to joy is returning to abiding, returning to,
I think maybe it's even looking at His face.
Yes.
Yeah, how quickly do I, fix my eyes on Jesus? How quickly do I set my face
listen?
Yeah.
Super good.
Can we, so as we talk about growing as mature disciples, I think maybe the premise of what we talked about yesterday is that as we want to implement disciplines and practices and rhythms into our lives, that the key thing I think the relational motivation. So even before we get to the practices to grow as disciples, that there's we are relational beings. And so the idea of connecting to God in prayer. And so kind of the 2 points there was, one, as we connect with God, listening prayer, what does he say? This helps me grow. I'm formed in my conversations with God. But we talked a little bit about the idea that even our prayers form, that God answers prayer. And so that we actually participate with him through prayer in forming what is happening.
Yes.
And in aligning our prayers with his will. So we talked about the connection with God in prayer, and then the connection with people, that we are formed. So really, kind of the motivation for discipleship and prayer is growth into maturity, but that it is this relational connection. So yeah, I think maybe how did that hit you guys as you listened to that, as we talked about that yesterday? Did that make sense even? I think that sometimes in my brain something can make sense. It's a logical path. And then I'm trying to communicate it, and I don't know if people are on that path with me or not.
Well, Eric, I'd love to hear your take, because you have a unique story in that you spent time in the mission field, where I don't think any of us long-term, or as long as you did, spent time away, where we've talked a lot over the years, people at this table, about being the feet to our own prayers. We begin to pray for God to move in the nations, but then you had the chance to actually, not just in a short-term way, not to make short-term less important.
I'm not offended.
But in the way that you. So I just would love to hear your take on being formed in prayer, seeing yourself be able to become some of the feet to your own prayers. How did that form you? How did that change your view on how prayers are answered, things like that?
Yeah, I think first off, in that kind of answers, going back to the maturity question, as the more I prayed and let it form me, the more I realized I wasn't mature, and the more I needed to do it more to find maturity in just the journey in it. Because before I stepped on a plane and went to the mission field, we were constantly praying for the nation, constantly praying for the people group, praying for ourselves, praying for other teammates, praying for the long-term team there, and all those things. And in doing that, in that process, just realizing how much we need help in the times of pressure to return back to joy, but also in just the normal day-to-day where we don't feel adversity or don't feel major moments of triumph or anything. But I think of those moments of like, I just woke up. Like, I just got done brushing my teeth, and was my natural inclination and rhythm was to go back into that place of prayer or seek the Lord in the scriptures. And the process was when I was praying for other people or praying for the people group, to just naturally have that bend, that in whatever I did, even though like going on the mission field feels so like big and a huge choice, that I was like, oh, I can't just do it for the big moments and the big things that are coming up. I actually just need to do it in the day-to-day.
Yes.
So I build those habits and rhythms in me, that when I was walking to the grocery store in Nepal and knew I wasn't gonna get beef, that I had to turn and go to the chicken area, like I had to be like, okay, Lord, I need to find joy in chicken right now, because I'm not gonna get some beef. But then also, when we were going out and praying for people and discipling on the front end before salvation, like that part matters too, and working through like breaking down the like Hindu and Buddhist mindsets so that they would be more open to accepting the gospel. And we didn't see fruit in that, coming back to the Lord in times of sadness and being like, what do I do with these emotions that I don't want to go back to joy, but I have to in the habits and rhythms I've built, I know I'm supposed to bring them to you.
Yes.
And sift through them, through the scripture, through the
Yes.
Holy Spirit directing me back to the words of Jesus, and do that process with
So good.
Him. Whether it was an unsuccessful day of evangelism or it was our day off. And it was like, no, I still need to have that rhythm, even though I'm not doing anything ministry-wise or anything more cool or holy, that I still needed to have that rhythm in me so He could still mature me, even though my maturity level was very low at the time.
I think the reality is I know we use the word rhythm, but I think it's what's happening with the rhythm, and it's that we're acquiring spiritual muscle. And so I think that sometimes rhythm feels like, eat your vegetables, but it's like, okay, but what's the why? Like,
So does acquiring muscle.
Yeah, sure. But it's more like, oh, okay, like these are spiritual muscles. So whether I'm on the mission field and I don't get my beef and I'm disappointed, or I didn't get the promotion that I wanted, or I got to pay my bills and I'm freaking out. It's spiritual muscle of I turn my heart, I bring my emotions to the Lord, and I dialogue with Him about it. He reminds me who He is. He reminds me who I am, and therefore I return to joy. And so the muscle is that process. And I think a definition I heard of spiritual maturity a couple of weeks ago is he was talking about the goals of life is that we would grow in love and glorify God. And I think that has just really in the last few weeks just helped remind me of like, okay, right, what are my goals? Like, yes, all these other like goals, but like ultimately in life is that I would, in every season that I would grow in glorifying you. And in every season I would grow in my love for you and my love for others. Yeah. Like, if I'm doing that, I'm winning, And so it's the rhythm of acquiring spiritual muscle is that no matter where I'm at, that God, if you're doing these things in me, I'm winning. No matter the circumstance, no matter the situation, good days, bad days. And I think what's hard is that generally it's the hard moments, the suffering, the trials that are the best soil for that to lift. If things are easy, well, those are like light weights. I got my like 1 pounders. But it's like, it's actually the suffering that's the heavy weight that is actually the greatest thing that's going to build the most muscle. And we hate that. We don't want that. I don't want that. But it's like, okay, right. What's the goal? Okay, God, mature my love, to glorify you and grow in love.
We do everything in our society, in our culture, to alleviate pain.
Right.
To make things easier, to make them more convenient. But the greatest growth comes from resistance, right? From training. So we don't like it, but it is part of it.
Yeah, it reminds me, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave, the God I love, just that idea. I think it's a good segue into the second half of the message, where when you are with people who are doing that regular lifting of spiritual work, then it makes it normal. And maybe, I'm not going to say less painful, just normal.
Yes.
And it helps to normalize a life of spiritual depth.
So good.
And so I love, you're even in the message talking about how every teenager bucks the idea of their parents saying, you're going to look like your friends, you're going to look like your friends. And every parent is right. And I thought that was exactly right, But I just would love to talk more about, maybe we could each share a few things about having a close group of friends going after the same things that we want in our heart. Even if, even if sometimes you're looking at your friends going, they're doing this more than I am, and I want to be a part of that group, I don't know. So we could talk about that, but the importance of having people around you who are pushing towards those things, doing those kind of, spiritual exercises, disciplines, rhythms, and they're staying spiritually fit. That's for you, Zach. Come on.
I think it's been the seasons of the most growth, but maybe also the most enjoyment is when I've had a small handful of people around me and we're all aiming at the same thing. And you can be, it's this idea of like encouragement isn't just, oh, you're doing a good job, but this actual giving me courage to keep going. And that when you're not isolated, when you're not alone, when you have others that want the same thing, that want to follow Jesus, that want to grow, that want to, whatever, it actually can be enjoyable. And I don't mean fun. I just mean okay, we can do this. I'm not alone. I'm not crazy, and so I've found it to be really important. And actually, it's a big part of my story. When I was a freshman in college was the first time that I felt the lack of that. And it wasn't that I jumped into some crazy sin. It wasn't that I fell away. I just felt my heart grow dull. And I was making decisions that didn't lead to me having a heart alive in God. And so it was easy to sleep in on a Sunday. And I had enough of my upbringing in me that I would sleep in. I'd stroll into church right when worship is ending. As soon as they said amen, I would leave. I wouldn't talk to a soul. So I still got to check the box.
Right.
But anyway, that year, I just felt I didn't have brothers around me. I didn't have that community. And I just felt me just kind of growing dull. And so it's one of the things that I've found is to help my heart stay alive is to surround myself with other people that we want the same thing. Even when we're not necessarily all doing it at the same time, that's part of it, is that we can help each other.
So, yeah. I think about the times I've been most consistent over my life in working out is when there was somebody who was showing up at the gym at 5 a.m., driving their own car there, and I couldn't just leave them hanging. They were my gym buddy to go work out and to suffer at 5 a.m. lifting weights together. Apart from that, I haven't been super consistent in working out. But I think that picture is true in our relationship with Jesus. I think it brings in the conversation of accountability. Accountability happens in confrontation. Hey, bro, you're messing up. Let's talk about that. But I think accountability also happens when the brother who you've attached yourself to is pursuing God and pursuing whatever it might be, God's will for his life, a theological topic, I don't know, and that spurs you on to keep going. And I think that maybe it's a guy thing, but that almost competition, hey, you can't have that. I want some of that. Yeah. Let's get after it. I think that has so driven me, especially in the context of prayer. I've led a prayer ministry now for over a decade, and throughout all of the seasons, there's different people who've come and went and plugged in for a certain amount of season, and I've just noticed that my walk with God is so shaped and formed in that season by those that I'm praying with and listening to them pray and hearing what they're going after. I'm hey, I want some of that. I want to go after that. And I think that without having that normalized in my life, I don't know how motivated I would be to go in God. And I think the depth to which we pursue those types of relationships, we want to go deeper in God together. Let's have deep relationships with friends and walk with each other when things are challenging and all of those things. I've got a friend who, this is at the end of last year, I had this random dream about him. He was in a hotel room and just weeping. It's the worst thing in the world had happened to him. So of course I wake up the next day, I'm hey bro, I just had this dream about you. Everything okay? He's no man, things are not okay. So I didn't super follow up with that. I should have called him immediately. And it was 4 months before I actually called him and talked with him about it. And it was a really challenging moment for him where he sort of started questioning some things about his community and the Lord. And I was oh, I was a brother born for adversity. I really should have been there. Yeah. Because he's been there for me, whatever. But I think God positions us around people so that we can spur one another on and go there.
Yeah. I think for men, it seems that the tendency is to pull away and not have any friends. That seems to be culturally what happens as years go on. We've had conversations about this, you and I. But I'd love to hear from your perspective the tendency for women and then the beauty of a sisterhood. I know you experienced that throughout your life, and so
yes. Well, it's interesting that you say that the tendency of men is to kind of pull away.
And be
I think the practicality of women's life, I think we are more relational, but the practicality of life pulls us away. And so it's I think there's two different things that are wanting to isolate. I think the nature of having young kids when you're just so busy, like, or, you know, like you're working, you're going to school, like whatever those dynamics, like I think our busyness of our culture, but then just the loneliness of early years with kids, like causes, it's just easy to isolate. And so I think when you have tasted depth of relationship with other people, pursuing God together, I think there's nothing like it. And I think that a lot of people haven't experienced that. So I think even when we talk about like discipleship in groups, they're like, okay, like good idea. But I think those who've experienced it, it's like, yes, give me that. Like when you've been able to take the mask off and be your true self. I heard someone say the phrase, the art of being weird. You know, when you've been able to just expose your weirdness. And it's like, am I weird too? And they're like, no, I'm weird too. It's like, okay, you know, here's my struggle and here's my struggle. And there's a camaraderie of being able to like cheer one another on and encourage each other. Like I'm encouraging you to get up out of that and come over here. And so I think when you've experienced that strength to say yes, it strengthens you to say yes to Jesus. And when you've experienced that, you long for it. And I think that this is one of the reasons I feel like I have fallen in love with the local church, is because it's so clear what our mission is. Like, it's so clear why we gather. It's not confusing. It's not like, well, you're my friend, but we hang, you know, we play this over here and we have game nights over here. And it's like, but where are we going? And I think that the clarity of the local church is like, okay, we're gathering here to glorify God, to grow in love, and to help each other. Like, and so it's made it so clear. And so I think that I've experienced that in female relationships. And there's, you know, you're my best friend, but we all need other best friends.
That is something, though, you know, we use the phrase fellowship of burning hearts. And, you know, if there's ever single people listening to this that would look to get married one day, I would say marry one. I think there's been no greater benefit than having someone that you're committed to for the rest of your life, that has a burning heart that you spur one another on. So yes, we absolutely need others as well. Yeah. But I'm grateful to have that. And I think for people looking for a future spouse, that's probably the key, you know, to be looking for.
I have a quick story, not about spouses. Sorry, Haley. But I remember, like, in that, like, just the need to gather around people and just know the weaknesses you have and say, hey, I want to rally to, not that it's like major sin issue, but even just knowing like the deficiencies you have. Like, I remember when we were younger, me and Zach, we had this terrible idea of doing 6 a.m. prayer meetings. And we were like, hey, we're going to do it. And we're going to go for it. And they were so good, except the part that they were at 6 a.m. So what we did, because there would always be someone that would like text at like 8:05 and be like, I'm so sorry I missed it. So what we started doing was like we would alternate, but most of the time at Zach's house, all spend the night there to make sure we would get up and go to the prayer meeting. And usually the person that didn't like spend the night, we were expecting the text from them. And even just understanding, hey, we were like young people that didn't want to get up early, just knowing those deficiencies, we found people with similar burning hearts and locked arms. And it wasn't like a huge major sin issue. I just didn't like getting up when the sun wasn't up. If the sun's not awake, why am I going to awake?
This is my story too.
Yeah.
High school, we had, so this is not the takeaway.
Yeah.
We'd have youth group on Sunday night. And then on Monday morning, 5:30 a.m., we would have what was called Breakfast with God at McDonald's. And so we would stay, our church had a house that was where the youth met. It was like the youth house. And so me and my buddies would sleep at the youth house in order to have the youth pastor drive us to McDonald's at 5:30, because there was no way we were getting there. So that's probably not the answer for most people.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying.
But
do what you
like we were a bunch of single guys, and we were like, we want to find God, and let's do it together. Let's find a way to do it together. And I like, our parents were like, sure, like, you're going to a prayer meeting. Like, okay, like, cool. Like, and we were like, let's take it. You know, we have the burning heart to meet God at 6 a.m., but we know, like, we're really tired and really weak, and we like staying up late. Let's find practical ways to build up one another to actually get to the place of encounter.
Yeah.
Because we would always like walk out of there, go to McDonald's, you know, a little budget thing we recommend. And we were like, we'd leave and say, wow, that was, we were meeting with God and it was so worth it. But if we were like, had just let ourselves do it on our own, like that prayer meeting probably would have stopped in the first month.
Yeah.
You know? So.
Well, Dan, what didn't make it into the message that you had hoped would make it on Sunday? Because I know you were
So
preaching
much.
like 4 sermons at once.
I know. I think just to go back to where we started, where the goal of growing in spiritual maturity, glorify God, grow as disciples, but it's not unto my own self-help. It is that the lamb that was slain would receive the reward of his suffering. That how can we hear God? And I believe hearing God is not only going to be just about me, but what he wants me to do at work tomorrow, this week. And so I think one of the things, so in that, no surprise, I talked about the story of the Moravians as a, you know, history story that we hope the Lord rhymes what he's doing here with. And I think one of the things that's unique to their story is this reconciliation that took place between theological differences and tension that was going on in the community. And it was, so they call it the revival of love, of brotherly love, because they came and they repented to each other and they had reconciliation. And that's the thing that launched this 100-year prayer meeting. That's the thing that ended up launching this first Protestant missions movement. And I think, I wish I had said it, I wish I had more time, whatever, no one else does, but I think we are ripe right now in the kingdom generationally, that if one generation will look at the next, if we have, you know, older and younger generations, if we would reconcile, if we would say we have different beliefs, we have different experiences, but how can we love each other? Where we have, our nation is so divided right now, whether that be for a number of reasons. I think we are ripe for reconciliation. And if we would see each other, what would happen if in the kingdom we defined ourselves mostly as Jesus people, and we repent to each other and we love each other and we see each other. I'm not saying it would look the same, but I think that's something that we are really we could really see God do if we would have the humility to turn to people and not just look at where we have differences. I think so. Growing up, I think a lot of differences were theological. Maybe that still exists. People, denominations split, or different churches defined by their theological differences. I think that exists. I think politically today, we have so many differences of opinion, and that's the thing there's tension and fighting over. If in the kingdom we would look at each other and love each other and have humility. I wanted to go into that, but it wasn't really the main point. So that's one of the things that I felt like that we could have talked about, is just, God, would you do that again? Would there be a move of reconciliation that brings about glory to Jesus? So that's one of the things.
And that's beautiful. I think it is super surprising for the time period, being the early 1700s, how ecumenical that movement was. Being both Moravian and Lutheran, not to mention the Moravians have differing theological positions. It's just really interesting that missions came out of a move that was decided to be ecumenical, to value unity rather than disunity, and to get kind of caught in their corners. I think that's a super valuable point, and I think it fits for right now, even though we're pretty used to the non-denominational space, which is built on being ecumenical, right? But we don't carry that same philosophy into our politics and into our parenting styles. I don't know. Pick your things where people pick corners. There's 100 of them. So.
On that line, I know what you're wrong. We had a conversation in the idea of formation, and you just talked about not only are we all formed, but sometimes we get deformed.
Yeah.
And it's not just about formation, but where have we been deformed? And you don't have to name names, but
totally.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. So basically, your point was we're either going to be conformed to the spirit of the age, to what's happening around us, which is ungodly, and then or we'll be formed like Jesus would intend. But then my only thing to throw in there was, I think that sometimes we can be deformed, meaning that we can be growing towards Jesus, but not the full thing that's available. We can believe lies within the faith that are not salvific. Doesn't mean we're not going to be saved, but they're a deformity. So for us at this table, we would all look at the scriptures and we would say, the Spirit of God is active, living, and moving right now. So we should experience things that are beyond what we would perceive as natural. You could say supernatural. I think that's probably a misnomer. I think that the natural and the supernatural live together, and that's how we see things. Anyway, so that's not a sermon on that, but the idea is that if you grew up in a tradition that was really clear on the virgin birth, the resurrection of Jesus, but really not really, and also really clear on saying there's not spiritual gifts, it'd be like having a broken arm where you can't reach the top shelf. You're deformed. The formation's malformed. It's deformed. You can't quite do that. And the only way to fix that kind of malformation is to break the bone and reset it. It's painful, it's hard, it changes your preconceived notions of things. But the healing process will form you again into a healthy Christian. So it's just this other idea where there's being conformed to things that are against God. There's being formed into the likeness of Jesus, and I think there's also a deformity or a malformity. And it can come from genuine, like a good place of somebody teaching that's not really in Scripture, or it can even come from a bad place where you experience spiritual abuse and you understand your context only in spiritual abuse, and so you end up with a performance mentality, or you end up in a certain theological context that would actually harm you, and that would be a malformation in my argument. Yeah.
So I think that this is where the idea of formation through conversation with God, through prayer, whether it is that we have conformed to the world, whether it is that we've believed things that are not true about God, I think, would he reveal that? Because he's the perfect leader. He is gentle and kind, and he will lead us into our formation. And that may require some this is hard, but I trust his leadership in that process. So anyway, thanks for sharing that. That was so good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't cover that we needed to say something about, something from the message yesterday, or this concept that if we don't mention it before we stop, will be on our mind all day? Anybody? All right.
Besides practical?
So then the last question is, what do we hope people would do with this week? In your perfect world, if somebody picked up this message, heard it, and in the next 7 days, what would you hope they did with it?
Yeah, I think the questions we asked at the end, where can you make room to have prayer in your life? And who do you want to either connect with to be formed by them or to form them? Or I think even the question of, are there things, we didn't even get into this, but what are the things that are forming us? Whether it's our phone, whether it's the news we read, whether it's the entertainment we watch, the people that we are with, anything, are there things that are forming us that we need to distance ourselves from? So I think those two questions are big. And practically speaking, for our church, I would love to invite people, come join us Mondays at noon or Tuesday nights at 6. Let's pray together and join a group. I mean, that's so simple, but I think those are two practicals that could be the takeaway.